Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A very good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines with you here live on British Muslim TV, Sky Channel 752, and we're also online, BritishMuslim.tv, with me, Ahmad Bostan, with you till the hours of 8 p.m. this evening. Regular viewers of the program will be familiar with our format. We have the great honor and privilege each and every week to interview, to speak with, to be inspired by and motivated by an inspirational personality from the worlds of politics, journalism, medicine, you name it, they feature on this very program. So if you have any questions or comments in relation to the show, we always love to hear from you. In fact, in reality, it is your show. 01924 231 083 is the studio number. That's 01924 231 083. We're at British Muslim TV on Twitter and we're British Muslim TV on Facebook. Now, the worlds of media and journalism are a world that includes so many people nowadays. But still, as we sit here today, there are real issues in terms of diversity, particularly at some of our most famous media corporations around the world. There are some, however, who, through hard work and determination, have managed to get to the height of their profession, not only in journalism, but in also becoming an acclaimed author as well as an acclaimed writer. I am delighted and honored that joining me today, I have the author of the acclaimed book, Good Morning, Afghanistan, a man who has traveled the world, no less, and a man who has been honored by Her Majesty the Queen for his services that we will speak about today. The great Wasim Mahmood OBE joins our program this evening. Assalamu alaikum, Wasim Mahmood. Thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Headlines. A real honor to have you on British Muslim TV tonight.
Assalamu Ahmad. The honor is all mine, trust me. You flatter me too much with that introduction.
The absolute pleasure, all well deserved. Now, Wasim Bhai, I want to start at the very beginning. You were born in the great nation of Pakistan, and around 2 years old, your family moved to the United Kingdom. Why did they choose to move to the UK? Was it the story of many of our parents and grandparents seeking a better life or seeking a different life here in the United Kingdom? What was the story behind the migration?
Ahmad, I think that the story of my family emigrating to the UK was no different from anybody else's. They came here to make a better life, to get us a better education, be financially better off, and I think the opportunities were much, much better here. So I think, like all first-generation immigrants to this country, my parents were no different.
And your family moved here and went straight to the great Midlands, the West Midlands, no less. What was it like growing up in the Midlands during the 60s?
It's a difficult question. I have nothing to compare it with, but it was. I mean, for me, it was really good because we did the same thing that I guess most people of that age, that era did, which was to get all their families on the same street. So I had uncles and cousins all on the same street. So it was a big family thing. I mean, we'd pop around to each other's houses, we'd play with each other. So it was one big family. I think it was around about the age of about 10 or 11 that my parents then decided that they wanted to move out of that area. And we more moved towards the Edgbaston, Selly Park area. And that was very different. And that I do remember because the area that I lived in, initially I grew up in, was very Asian, was very Pakistani. And it was a bit of a culture shock to go to Selly Park and Edgbaston, which was predominantly white. And I remember when I started school there, I was probably one of 2 or 3 Asian kids there, if that.
And that culture change ever so suddenly in your life that took place. Edgbaston, famous for the International Cricket Stadium, quite a nice area to live in terms of housing and accommodation nowadays. How did you deal with that? How did you cope with that at the time? Was it very much a different reality at home and a different reality at school? What was it like for you?
I think again, I think most of us who grew up in that age had those two different realities, didn't we? I think that we had one life, one side of the front door, and another life the other side. I think when we moved to Selly Park, when we moved to that area, I think there was a little bit more integration, but not really. So I guess it only started changing when I started going to college, or even later when I actually managed to get a job and started working for the BBC, that things really began to change and it became my reality as opposed to the reality that my parents created.
So let me ask you, even back then, Wasim Mahmood, so today we speak about many young Muslims growing up, and sometimes people say they are facing an identity crisis. You know, where do we belong, or who are we? Are we British? Are we Muslim? Are we Muslim British? And I guess this goes to the essence of actually this television channel, British Muslim TV, confidently Muslim, comfortably British. Even back then, Wasim Mahmood, was it the case that people were struggling with their identity?
Oh, very much so. I mean, when I joined the BBC in the 80s, I did so many programs about the subject. Young people were so sort of split between, who they were. I think I went through the same as everybody else, I guess. But my answer was, I used to go to Pakistan and really didn't find myself fitting in there, didn't really find myself fitting in here. So where did I belong? I actually met an Indian film director once called Krishna Shah. And he actually changed my perception on this by actually telling me that, look, rather than taking it as a negative, actually look at it as a positive. You're in a very unique position in that you can actually pick and choose from both of these cultures. So you've actually got a hybrid here. And I think once I had that conversation, it became very clear for me that, I am British Muslim, British Pakistani. And that's, it's neither one thing or the other, but a hybrid of the two.
And you progressed, of course, with your journey of life. In Edgbaston, you went on to secondary school, to college, to university, and you had a stint, as you just said there, at journalism. What inspired you to choose the route of journalism as one to go down, especially at a time when so many parents were focused on their children, rightly, becoming doctors, barristers, and the like?
Well, both my parents were journalists. My father ran the first Urdu newspaper. He was one of the team who ran the first Urdu newspaper in the UK, something called Mashriq. And my mother started the first women's magazine in the UK. Wow. And my brother and myself were dragged into that. I mean, every month we couldn't afford to have the printers collate the magazine and staple it together. It was too expensive. So once a month, my brother and I used to spend a weekend putting, these 60 pages together and stapling them, and then helping my father deliver them to the grocery shops. It didn't used to go into newsagents in those days. It was through the grocery shops. So we had to go around the Midlands hand delivering, 5 copies here, 5 copies there. But for me, it was great. We used to get, I remember in those days, a £5 for a weekend's work, which was amazing.
Wow. Quite a sum back then.
It was. But Ahmad, look, the thing was that I realized the power of journalism there at that point. I mean, I think the one thing that really got to me was the freebies that I could get. I mean, I don't think I ever paid for a book, a record, or a go to see a film or theatre. And then I cottoned onto a great thing. I cottoned onto this thing that I could test cars. So I became a reviewer of cars, and every week I'd be getting a car to test for a week.
Wonderful.
It was hilarious.
Wow.
I mean, what that had to do with a woman's magazine, I have no idea. but it was great. So yes, I realized the power of media. I realized but however, I didn't go into journalism as such. I was more inclined towards drama and creativity and the creative arts. But yes, of course, I can write, and I used to write, but that was not the main thrust of what my interest was.
And back then, when, as you said, your mother began the first magazine there for women from the Asian Pakistani community, what was the engagement like among the Asian community, Muslim community, Pakistani communities back then when it came to media publications? Were they quite engaged? Were they avid readers?
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, I remember before my father and his friends launched this magazine, this newspaper. One of the things that they used to ask anybody who was coming back from Pakistan to bring with them was newspapers, and that newspaper would go up and down the street and probably have 100 people read it before it finally died.
Wow. Yeah. Yes.
But that was how, because look, global news didn't exist. We couldn't go onto the internet the way we do. Even, you had to book a phone call a week or so in advance for 3 minutes, right?
Wow.
And so it was a different era. So there was so much lack of information that people, sucked up anything that they could get.
Sure. We're in conversation with Wasim Mahmood OBE about his incredible journey in not only journalism or being introduced to journalism at such a young age, but also his journey through the arts, through drama, particularly as a young man back then, and quite young right now, actually, from a Pakistani background. We'd love to hear from you here on British Muslim TV. Please get in touch with the program. Back of this. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Behind the Headlines here on British Muslim TV. We have the great honour and privilege tonight to be in conversation with the acclaimed author, broadcaster, writer, a man of many talents indeed, and those talents recognised by no one less than Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of this great country in being awarded the OBE. Wasim Mahmood OBE joins us on the programme. Now, Wasim, before the break, we were speaking about your passion for the arts and for drama. Let me ask you, back then, as a Pakistani young man, as a young Muslim, was it common for young British Asians to be going into drama, the arts? I know it's pretty normal now, but what about back then?
Oh, God, totally not. I mean, the fights I used to have with parents and everybody I guess I would have liked to go to drama school, but I think the compromise that I ended up having with my parents was that you can go and do, as long as you do A-level drama, then you can get on with it, because the idea was that I could at least have a degree of sorts. But even then, the sort of, the knock... But my parents were almost embarrassed to sort of mention to anybody what subject I was doing. And, to find an A-level course in drama in those days was next to impossible. In fact, I found one in Sutton Coldfield, which in fact was the pilot, the first A-level that was ever done. So no, it was incredibly difficult. There was a tremendous knockback from the community. I mean, they didn't understand what I was doing, why I was doing, and but it was something I enjoyed.
And where did your passion for the arts come from? Did you very much see yourself as starring in the next Macbeth, or was it more about I'll be in the next Veer Zara film or something of that nature? Where was your passion at in terms of wanting to go in to drama?
I fancied myself as a bit of a thespian. Okay, I fancied treading the boards, doing Shakespeare and all of that. That's what I really, really wanted to do. But you know what? Let me tell you a funny story. I mean, one of the exercises you do in drama is improvisation. And one of the classes, we had to be trees, right? So we had to be a tree. But I just, I didn't feel it. I just stood there like this, sort of waving my arms about, pretending to be a tree. But I didn't think, and that just, there was an epiphany that I could not act because I was not being a tree. So I decided to move into direction and production and tell people to be trees. Yes. It was much easier. But Ahmad, the funny thing is that the best actor in the class was a guy called John, who was with me. And we kept in touch, and I think he was with me in Afghanistan at one point, and we were talking while the sort of bombs were falling around us. And I said, John, tell me one thing. Were you ever being a tree? And he said, no, I just stood there with my arms. I thought, oh my God, just think, if I hadn't changed there, I could be sitting doing this interview from, my poolside at Beverly Hills. Who knows what could have been. No, so look, I've always had a love of literature. I've had a love of creative expression, be it any form, and I just felt that the best way for me to express myself was through drama and production and that sort of side. And that's what then led me into television, producing television.
Yes, and let's talk about that, and not just producing television, but actually entering the most acclaimed and prominent British institution known as the BBC. How did you land that? You know what? I mean, I had just done my first ever job as a directing was to do some industrial training films for Dunlop tires. They wanted somebody to go in and make films about how tires were made. And this is, again, an incredibly funny story in the sense that, I turn up there expecting a whole crew there, except they point me to a room and say, there's the camera, go and make it. So I lug all this equipment across, make it, and then everybody goes off to lunch, I go off to lunch, and I come back. And the person's changed. In filmmaking, you do the wide shots first, and then you go in to do the close-ups. So that's the way I was doing it. But they changed during the lunch break, and the guy who was there on that machine after lunch was black. So it was just incredibly funny. I mean, the continuity was all over the place. So you'd have this white guy doing the wide shot, and when you cut the close-up, there was this black hands. So anyway, I was doing that, about to be sacked from it, and I saw this job advertised in the Evening Mail. They were looking for producers for the BBC. I was only 21 at the time, and I thought, you know what, I'm not going to get it. But look, let's fill in the form at least understand what filling in a BBC form is like. So I did that, sent it off. Again, didn't expect to hear back, but 3 weeks later, I get summoned for an interview. And again, I didn't think that I'd ever get it. I mean, come on, BBC does not take producers at 21. So I didn't for 1 minute think I was going to get it. So I remember to this day that I didn't even wear a tie. I was wearing a cream blazer and black cords and a black shirt. And I got in, and there was the controllers and God knows who else there. And I thought, you know what, this is going to be a good opportunity to tell these people what I really think of their programming. And so for about an hour or so, I just, enjoyed myself. And 6 weeks later, they ring up and say, can we speak to Mr. Mahmood? And I said, sorry, my dad's not here. I mean, why would the BBC want to be calling me? They often call my dad for a comment on something. Yes.
And no, they said, no, we want Mr. Wasim Mahmood. And I said, oh, why? And they said, oh, we'd like to offer you the job. And that
Wow.
was it. That was it. And I then went on to produce the Asian Magazine program, which went out on BBC One on every Sunday morning, 1 hour, half an hour every week. I produced the Gadbar program, which was for Asian women on BBC Two on Wednesdays. And we also did Make Yourself at Home, Apna Hi Ghar Samjhe on Radio 4. So, it was great in those days. I mean, we used to go, we were going to about 90% of the Asian population in those days.
Wow, wow. And being able to express your culture on a great British institution such as the BBC and being given the opportunity to do so would have helped you no end in terms of your self-confidence and also your direction that you were taking in life in terms of the path you wanted to take and the profession you wanted to be engaged in.
I mean, look, they asked me, I applied for this job, at the end of my first year of university. And one of the questions they asked me on my interview was that, why don't you want to finish off your degree? And I said, well, listen, 2 years of BBC experience as a producer is going to mean a lot more to me in life than finishing my degree like everybody else would. So in answer to your question, being at the BBC in the 80s was, the best place in the world to learn about television. The BBC in those days was a hell of a lot different than it is today.
Sure.
And Pebble Mill was the hub of innovation. I mean, I managed to and got to work on so many exciting programs. We used to do Pebble Mill at 1. Which was a lunchtime magazine program, which so many people used to watch. So there was a hell of a lot that I was thrown into it at the deep end. So I had to, nobody ever gave any allowance for the fact that this was my first job, or that this was, I was only 21, fresh out of university. To survive, I had to compete and be as good as everybody else. Yes. So they made no allowances for my age at all. And so I had to learn on the job. And what a better place to learn than the BBC.
Absolutely. But you didn't stay there because your journey continued. You moved on to strategic communications, working for so many people around the world.
There's a couple of steps, in between there. I think, one of the things that I moved on from the BBC was because they changed the essence of very much of Asian broadcasting. They started, instead of making programs for Asians, they decided to make programs about Asians, thereby losing their primary target audience. So I felt that was wrong. And I felt that there was still a need for Asian programming of some sort. So I then decided to go off and set up what was the first Asian satellite channel in the UK. It was called TV Asia, and it was the first one on Sky. I mean, in those days, nobody even knew what a satellite was. But the very fact that we managed to get 100,000 subscribers in the first year shows that there was a need for it, and we did pretty well.
Do you think, Wasim Mahmood, briefly, if you would, because we are coming up to a break, was that the landmark moment where effectively broadcasting that was provided for an hour or two a week on mainstream broadcasters then actually diverted and changed into specific cultural and religious TV, radio and broadcast channels? Was that key moment where we effectively acquired our own broadcast?
I mean, I am so sort of thrilled to see what you guys are doing and where you have taken it. I mean, this is what, look, there's room for broadcasting, but there's equal room for narrowcasting. And digital broadcasting gives you the opportunity for narrowcasting. Yes, I miss that sort of idea where we used to broadcast and go out to millions of people every week. I miss that, because I think getting an audience of 2 2 million now, and everybody's ecstatic. We used to get 20 odd million,
Wow.
for programming we used to do. So yes, I miss that. I miss that ability to reach that. But likewise, I think, I think everybody has the right to sort of
Sure.
have the programming they want to receive,
For sure.
and narrowcasting provides that.
Absolutely. We're in conversation with Wasim Mahmood OBE and talking to him about his journey in the BBC and why he left the BBC and all of the great work that he did in establishing, as he said, the first satellite TV channel back then, all those years ago, targeting and aimed at and put together by the British Asian community. We'll be back right after this break, speaking more about Wasim's journey and seeing where it takes us. Back after this. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Behind the Headlines here on British Muslim TV, live on this pretty cold Friday evening, but we do hope that the transmission we are bringing you this evening is warming you up, most certainly full of inspiration and motivation, as we are delighted to be joined by the acclaimed author Wasim Mahmood OBE here this evening. Now, Wasim Mahmood is not just an author, but someone who actually founded and set up the first ever satellite television channel aimed at our communities, our ethnic communities, all those decades ago. Now, Wasim, you left a career, a very successful and fruitful career at the BBC in order to take this step. Moving from a position of security to one of effectively self-sufficiency is not an easy decision. And especially when you made that decision on ethical grounds, on a viewpoint that you firmly held in terms of the direction of the broadcaster that you were at the time. What was that process like for you, setting up that channel back in those days?
It was incredibly difficult. I mean, honestly, 30 years on, I don't think my wife has still forgiven me for that. Giving up a secure job at the BBC to chase dreams. Okay, the first thing I did, this is how naive I was, Ahmad. I wrote about two or three pages and went and knocked on the door of my local bank in Worcester, where I was at college and still banked, and said, hey guys, I want to start a satellite channel. I think that I can have 100,000 people paying £10 a month, which is £1 million a month. So I need about 5 or 6 million to get this going. When can I have it? Literally like that. And it was then that I was explained that I need to do a business plan, and that, what a business plan was, and, everything that went with it. So it took me about 1.5 years, 2 years of my life to pull that together. And it was difficult because people just didn't understand. You'd go in and they'd say, satellite? What's a satellite? I mean, don't forget, they weren't prevalent at that point. I mean, this was when Sky had just started, and nobody understood and there was only 16 analog channels. So nobody really got the concept. So not only was I sort of having to change I actually had to mentally get people to change their viewing habits and to accept something, a different way of getting programming, which, was very difficult. And then, of course, there was the pressures of, going from the comfort of the BBC, where you could click your fingers and have a crew, some of the best, some of the people I worked on were BAFTA-winning cameramen and God knows what. And then, just having Depeche or whoever, whose previous experience was running a video shop, making videos for, videos for weddings. And but then at the same time, trying to produce the same level of programming or the same quality of programming. Because look, when you're getting people to pay for programming, they expect you to deliver a certain amount of quality. Yes. The fact that you don't have the resources or the budgets is none of their business. I mean, you can't put a caption underneath saying, Ahmad apologizes for the quality of the program, but I didn't have a budget. They don't care. So especially when we were expecting them to pay, I had to deliver programming that was as good as, if not, the same as the BBC on budgets which were, peanuts, really,
Well, you enjoyed phenomenal success in setting up that channel. You were able to sell it on for a substantial sum back then. And then you spoke about comfort earlier, and actually, as your life progressed, you were not seeking comfort, but a bit of an adventure, because you moved on to a career that led you to places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Tell us more.
Okay, first, let me correct something. I did not make anything out of the sale of the channel, okay, because it was the investors who owned it. I was just working for them. So I was just glad to have achieved it. So that was, so let's not have this sort of impression that I was sitting tidy on millions.
Otherwise you would be live from Beverly Hills.
Otherwise I would be going exactly. And otherwise I wouldn't have ended up in, the places you just mentioned. Okay. No, I started working for a Danish NGO, and they specialized in reconstruction of media post-war. What that specifically means is that when there's been a war or any sort of conflict whatsoever, media has taken a hit. Sometimes it's about physically rebuilding studios and radio stations, TV stations. Sometimes it's just helping them, get back on the air with the equipment they have, helping them with the programming, and making sure that the programming is, is what the people want. I mean, for example, and because of that, I ended up, you're right, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, where I spent 5 years, Iraq, Beirut, Syria, effectively wherever there's been conflict recently, you can imagine I've been there. Afghanistan was very special to me. I think it became very personal to me as well, because I was actually supposed to be on flight American Airlines 77, the one that went on into the Pentagon, and on 9/11, and I was ill and wasn't traveling to the US, so I missed it. So what then happened after that in Afghanistan, I don't know, I felt that I'd been saved to do something, and I felt I needed to be there. And it was I went in to Afghanistan possibly 6 weeks after the fall of the Taliban the first time around. And it was one of the most moving experiences of my life. We set up a radio station called Good Morning Afghanistan, which went on to become the most listened to show in Afghanistan. And at one point, Karzai sort of contacted us, the president, and commended us for the fact that our programs had saved thousands and thousands of lives.
Wow.
And it's very humbling to know that something I did that.
And when you landed in Afghanistan, as you said, literally weeks after the fall of the Taliban the first time, what was it like? What was Afghanistan like back then? The images, the sounds, the people, the feelings. I know you've got a whole book about it. But...
Yeah, I'll plug that in a minute. No, it was incredibly, it's difficult to describe. It was, they seemed like zombies. I mean, they'd been on Afghanistan when I arrived there, had been under some sort of conflict for the last 20 years. And, the last people who had controlled them were Taliban. And once they'd gone, I mean, people were lost. They were wandering around, still not believing that the Taliban had gone. So it was a very eerie place, very quiet. It was very strange, very, very strange. But the people were loving, the people were welcoming, and it was such a privilege to be there at that time to share that special moment in history with them. I always am so humbled and privileged to have been there at that time. And it was great because the time I was there, I could see this country suddenly waking up and learning to live again. And that was a phenomenal thing to see.
And clearly in those first few months, first few years, we have seen significant advancement in terms of the rights and opportunities of women in Afghanistan, the rights and opportunities of minority ethnic communities. What was that like to witness? Do you feel that the programs that you were doing from this radio station were very much inputting into that, contributing to that sense of empowerment never before seen in Afghanistan for many years?
Very much so. We were the first radio station to have male and female presenters presenting programs together. I mean, totally, that's what we were there for. We were the first people to employ women again after the Taliban. So yes, we did everything we could. And even the programming we were doing was empowering women all the time, telling them about their rights, telling them what they, particularly promoting girls' education, and telling even men why they should be sending their children and their daughters to school. So there was I feel that we were instrumental in the initial stages to sort of laying the foundations to help women's empowerment. But one thing I'll say, let me tell you a little story. I was out of the country on one of my trips back home, and suddenly all hell broke loose in the media here because the Afghanistan television, Radio Television Afghanistan, had banned female singers on television. So I went back and I met the minister, and I sort of met the director general, and I said, guys, what's going on? The West is really kicking up a fuss. And the director general turned around to me and said, look, I'm making programs for my country. We've just come out of X years of Taliban rule. I will put female singers on, but not just yet. The West has to understand that, this is about my country and what we want, not what they want.
And that's such a powerful statement, because actually, whilst there have been many who have traveled to these nations with good intentions, it's often difficult and becomes a bit of a grey area, as it were, when anyone, whether it's governments or individuals from the West or from countries like our own, Britain and the United States, go over there. Are we necessarily doing what the people of that country want? And as you just said there, Wasim Mahmood, the importance of that process being led by, agenda set by, and actions completed on behalf of the people is so incredibly important. We will continue our conversation with Wasim Mahmood OBE, who we are delighted to be joining us on the program this evening, a man who entered Afghanistan at a time when the Taliban had just been removed from power the first time, and at a time of significant change in that nation. And so dear were the experiences of Wasim Mahmood OBE that he has written an entire book about it. Want to learn more? Join us right after this break. Stay tuned to Behind the Headlines. Stay tuned to British Muslim TV. We'll be back right after this. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the final part, would you believe it, already, of Behind the Headlines here on British Muslim TV. We're in the middle of a fascinating conversation with the Wasim Mahmood OBE, an acclaimed author of Good Morning Afghanistan, a man who's traveled to Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Beirut, you name it. He's been there, and he's telling us about his journey, experiences, and definitely we need a follow-up program with Wasim Mahmood. But Wasim, just before the break, when we left you, you were speaking about the words of a media director in Afghanistan who said it's so important that the agenda is set by the people themselves. How do you think how do you draw that line between
Okay.
ensuring that that happens every time, especially when you've got so many actors involved?
Ahmad, last year was the 20th anniversary of the, everything happening, and it gave me a chance for reflection, a lot of reflection. And also then, of course, the events of August gave me a lot of time to think about what had really gone wrong. I don't want to get into the politics. There are far better, more qualified people who can address whether it was right or wrong or what happened, okay? I'm not going to get into that. I'll just leave you with one thought of my experiences of Afghanistan. The problem was, very simply put, we, the West, did too much telling and not enough listening. That's it. And that is the case of Iraq, that's the case of Libya, that's the case of every conflict. We do too much telling and not enough listening.
And how do we learn from that? Because there is the politics, and we don't want to get into the politics, but we know that as a result of the war in Iraq and as a result of issues there, many say today that we have these extreme factions, these barbaric groups that have come out of the disarray that we now see in many of those countries. How do we do better next time as a country, as a people, and particularly our governments and our leaders? How do they do better, perhaps through the lens of media and the creative industries that you've been so involved with?
That's incredibly difficult. I think, I can give you a couple of examples, all right? I think when I was in Iraq, for example, in Baghdad, all the allies and their people, all of these people who were working, reconstructing Iraq, were all based in this compound or part of Baghdad called the Green Zone. They'd arrive at the airport, be helicoptered in, and that was it. They had and that was like Little America. And they had absolutely no contact with the real people or the real Iraqis outside of that zone. And I was, I'm fortunate. I was able to be in the red zone, dangerous as it was, but at least I got a feel for what real Iraqis wanted. And that's it. Forget about media, forget about anything else. Just listen to the people. I have one abiding memory of Baghdad, which was that I was with a taxi driver who said to me that, and this is 6 months, 7 months after the Allies had gone in and got rid of Saddam, he said to me the most telling words, which were, if the Westerners want true democracy, let Saddam stand for elections, and I bet you he'd win. What can I say to that?
It certainly is food for thought, and I think especially as we now enter 2022, we're already in February of this particular year. There is serious pause for reflection there in terms of what's happened and how lessons can be learned by those in leadership and those who have made decisions in terms of where we go from here. But going back to your own journey now, Wasim Mahmood, you spent time in Afghanistan, you spent time in Iraq. Where did you go from there after such experiences that have really shaped you and no doubt moved you in terms of what you've seen and experienced in your lifetime?
I think what I did was address what you've just said, which is to try and find a way of making media make sure that these sort of atrocities or these things never happen again. So I moved into strategic communications, and I worked with governments, agencies, and people to help them use media to change behavior. So I did a lot of work in Pakistan for countering terrorism. I did, I don't know if people know, but I did the campaign called Ye Hum Nahi, This Is Not Us. Yes. So I did that. So I was finding innovative ways of trying to get these anti-terror messages out. And I really found that challenging. Effectively, the last thing that I did was a project for US State Department, where I set up and was running a satellite channel in northern Nigeria, countering Boko Haram ideology. And I spent 2 years living in northern Nigeria.
Wow.
And so, but since then, I've sort of been back here and looking at where media is here, and maybe getting back into production a little bit.
And that work you did, the word anti-terror, counter-terrorism, prevent, we know the initiative of the government to tackle terrorism, extremism. There is no one out there who would disagree with that work going on. But it has really, as you said, been a difficult task, given sometimes the misconceptions, the errors in terms of how narratives have been put across, how the media have portrayed Islam and Muslims. It's really been an uphill struggle, hasn't it, to address those issues, and particularly to show that actually that work is extremely important and positive work, especially when it comes to Dawah itself.
I think, Ahmad, we could have a whole program just talking about that, about, prevent and the sort of messages that I was working with. I think what you've just said is very important. I think what has become apparent to me is that when I've come back, is the role that media and media representation has. And look, media is the only window that some of these people out there in Nigeria, out there in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, that's the only way they know how the West represents them. And come on, the way we've been represented over the last 20 odd years, leaves a lot to be desired. But what I've decided to do, and what I am doing, is that nobody's going to do this for us. We've got to get out there and tell our own stories. And that's what I'm doing. I'm working on a few really great projects, a couple of feature films. In fact, ironically, a certain broadcaster has just snapped up or is negotiating the rights to my own story, Good Morning Afghanistan.
Wow.
But it's about, we've got to go out there, we've got to tell them our own stories, because you know what? Nobody's going to do it for us. All this conversation about diversity, inclusivity, the millions that's been thrown at it. Look, these were exactly the same conversations I was having in the 80s in the BBC. Nothing's moved on, okay? And my children will be having the same conversations. My grandchildren will be. So unless we break that cycle, unless we go out there and tell the stories to mainstream, we tell them how we want to be presented. That's the only way this is going to happen. And this, Ahmad, is what I appreciate what you guys are doing on British Muslim TV, because you're presenting a very different picture to the general consensus that people have about Muslims.
Thank you very much. But a question I'd put back at you, Wasim Mahmood OBE, is, do we have a seat at that table? Because quite often, if you speak to writers, aspirational authors, they'll say, I'm struggling to get published, I'm struggling to get recognized, I'm struggling to get my work on broadcast agencies. Do we have that seat at the table? And if we don't, how do we get that seat at the table?
We don't, but we have to fight for it. And we have to, we've got to prove ourselves. I mean, look, there's a particular project that I'm working on, and I specifically wanted a Muslim writer for it. But there were none out there. Well, there was none out there. Okay, sorry, let me correct that. There was none out there that I could find people willing to invest millions of dollars in making a film. So we've got to, it's all very well making, this accusation that we don't have a seat at the table, but we've got to have the talent to back it up as well. There have been projects which I'm aware of, which were Muslim, and did, had a lot of hype around them, but at the end of the day, they weren't good enough. So look, so what I'm trying to do, I am fighting for that seat at the table, but I'm not, jumping on a soapbox. I'm going to let the work speak for us, right? That's how we get a seat at the table, is that somehow we get these things made, small, big, whatever, but we get them in front of the right people, and that's the way we earn our seat at the table.
Wonderful and inspirational message there, Wasim Mahmood OBE. Finally, briefly, if you would, for about 30 seconds or so, before we wrap up tonight, what would be your concluding message for our viewers?
Oh God, that's very difficult, isn't it? No, I think the message I would give is that, look, I would urge people, I would want Muslim creatives to come forward. I would want them to reach out to me. I would want them to, look, I'm here. If there's any experience that I can help open doors, I'm here. That's the way we're going to do it, right? So I'd love to hear stories. I'd love to hear experiences. And let's see, come on, together we can do this, and we will do this.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you guys have, as I said, got a great start. You've started the process. Let us work together to, break open that glass ceiling, so to say.
For sure. Wasim Mahmood OBE, an absolute pleasure and honor, sir, to have you on the program this evening, sharing your incredible journey from journalism in your early days to drama, the creative industries, to traveling around the world, spreading a positive message. We'd really appreciate your time. Thank you, dear viewers, for joining us. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.